Time now for Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. Joining us are ESPN's senior writer Mark Ogden and sports journalist and broadcaster Henry Winter. Welcome to you both. Thanks very much for being with us. Let's first of all run through those back pages. Let's start with the Telegraph. Their main headline, Spurs fury at Postecoglou axe. Well, there's also a line from the England boss about Jack Grealish. Another picture of Ange Postecoglou, back of the sun. Mate, Levy axes Ange 16 days on from Bilbao. As for the Times, they pay a nod to that trophy success. It used to be about glory, their headline. Another bit of Aussie lingo there. Goodbye, mate. Spurs axe Aussie Ange and are ready to grab Frank if they pay £10 million. They focus on the next move for Tottenham, saying Thomas Frank could be the man to take over from Ange Postecoglou. That is the eye. As for the Express, Outpost, their headline. Europa League glory will live with me for a lifetime, says Big Ange after sacking. Finally to the Star, Season 3 cancelled. A little nod to that famous quote from Ange Postecoglou during that trophy parade. So much to discuss with our guests, and Mark Ogden, let's start with you, because this decision to sack Ange Postecoglou has really provoked a lot of debate, quite a bit of emotion as well. And the main headline in the Telegraph, Spurs fury at Postecoglou axe. Some sources claiming the players here, as far as the Telegraph are concerned, angry about the decision to sack Postecoglou. What was your reaction, Mark, when you heard the news?
I wasn't really surprised. I think it's been coming. I think obviously the Europa League win has kind of given Tottenham something to think about, but I think the noises leading up to the Europa League final for weeks, really, maybe even for months, was that Ange was going to struggle to keep his job no matter what happened against United in Bilbao. And I think, you know, you look back to that game and yes, it was a fantastic occasion for Tottenham, a win. They won a trophy for the first time in 17 years, but it wasn't a great performance. It wasn't won by Ange playing, you know, champagne football or having a great performance. It was won because there was two bad teams and Spurs were the least bad team on the night. But they won the trophy and it probably gave Daniel Levy, the Spurs chairman, something to think about. But ultimately, Tottenham's performance in the league last season, 38 points, they were the team that was above the relegation zone. It was nowhere near good enough. And I think that is what's cost Ange Postecoglou the job. Now, in terms of players being unhappy about it, you know, this happens a lot when managers are sacked, the players come out and, you know, put on Instagram or Twitter their sympathy for the coach, sorry boss, sad to see you go, etc, etc. But, you know, during the season when they were underperforming and not helping Ange out on the pitch, it's kind of a bit hypocritical to now suggest that they want him to stay. So I think ultimately, you know, from Tottenham's perspective, it's probably the right decision. And if the players aren't happy about it, well, you know, they had the opportunity last season to do something about it and they didn't until they won the Europa League. So ultimately a tough decision, but I think the right one.
A tough decision, says Mark. Henry, do you think this is a move that has divided the players and the supporters?
Well, I think Mark's right in that the players will immediately come back on side, particularly if they can get in a coach of Thomas Frank's personality, charisma, reputation, tactical nous. I think that will calm very quickly. And players, you know, I think when they check their bank balance at the end of the month, I think they'll know that things are pretty rosy for them at Tottenham Hotspur. So I don't see any sort of grand dissent, any grand mutiny there. But I think I mean, I would have been with Oggy at 8 o'clock on the night of that Europa League final. Where I would disagree is that it wasn't simply the fact that he won a trophy, and that is what the game has to be about. I understand it's about the money, it's about the head, it's about going and actually getting into the Champions League, but it's also about trophies. And if you're fans and you have that day out, that night out, that memory, shared memory of Bilbao, for a lot of Tottenham fans, that was pretty special. And actually, in terms of the performance, I mean, Oggy's completely right. Two very poor teams, also at 16th and 17th in the Premier League. The rest of Europe must have been absolutely sort of laughing, saying, you know, what's happened to the standard of English football? But Postecoglou, who we see here, sort of lapping up the sort of, the respect and the thanks of many Tottenham fans. He actually got them playing very defensively, particularly in the second half. It was very defiant. Ange Wall, I think people were calling it, rather than Ange Ball, the risk-taking, high press, high line that we were used to with Ange. So actually, he showed that he could be a defensive coach as well, which is clearly what they would need in the Premier League. But it's one of those stories where you've actually got sympathy on both sides. I can understand why Daniel Levy, who has to think with his head, who has to think with the numbers and focus on the Champions League, has made that decision. And I thought Tottenham's statement was actually pretty heartfelt and was a very smart and just sensitive piece of communication. But then so was Postecoglou, thanking the fans, not so much thanking the board. So I can understand why Spurs are split. The players won't be split the moment Thomas Frank walks through the door, if it is to be Thomas Frank, and Brentford obviously want to hold on to him. So, but I would have given him a little bit more time. I just think that performance, the defensive streak that Tottenham showed, outweighs in a way those 22 Premier League defeats.
More time, says Henry, and Henry mentioned those pictures, the Tottenham supporters loving that trophy parade and the scenes. They were really special. They haven't had a situation like that for so many years. So as a result of that, Mark, do you think there was a strong argument to give Ange Postecoglou more time?
Yeah, absolutely. I get that. I mean, obviously, Henry's right. It is about winning things. It's about glory, as the headline says, and Tottenham haven't won anything for such a long time. And, Ange Postecoglou is now, a legendary figure at Tottenham for delivering not just a trophy, but a major European trophy. And I think a European trophy tends to count a lot more than a domestic cup. So, Ange has won that, but you can't escape the performance in the league. They were so bad. And, we're talking about giving the guy next to it a bit longer, but just 12 months ago, Man United did that with Erik ten Hag, and it was a disastrous decision. United beat Man City in the FA Cup final. They beat the champions to stop them doing the double. It was a big performance, and at the time, it looked like it was a decision that could backfire, and it did backfire. Ten Hag was gone, by early season, October, November time, and you have to say that with the way that Ange has performed, not just last season, but I think in Spurs' statement, they mentioned how many points he's won over the last 70 games, and it's not a lot. So you don't want to get to a situation in October and November where you're having to make a change. And if you want Thomas Frank, it's going to be harder to get him out of Brentford mid-season. So I think Spurs have looked at it, taken a step back and thought, we need to make a change now. It's better to make a change in the summer because you've got pre-season to work with the players, as United found out by going too late on Ruben Amarim. So I think Spurs have made a sensible decision. But you're right, the club have won a trophy. And if you win a trophy and get sacked, it's not great. But this is a big test of Daniel Levy now and his ambition for Tottenham. What is Tottenham's purpose? Are they a club that will be challenging for the big honours, or is a club like the Europa League, a cup like the Europa League, not good enough for Tottenham? So maybe Daniel Levy has to explain what Tottenham's ambitions and motivations are.
It's a big moment for Daniel Levy, and if we look at the back of the Times, Henry, it used to be about glory, talking about the trophies and the significance of that. It was interesting hearing Mark speak about Erik ten Hag. Do you think, Henry, that was in Daniel Levy's mind, potentially giving Ange Postecoglou more time? If it was a tough start to the next season, they could then have a disjointed campaign like Manchester United have just had.
Well, possibly, but then it depends how you actually spend the £200 million that Ten Hag was given in the summer. If that had been spent more wisely, then there might not be so much of the debate and the need to get rid of Ten Hag. It's about investing astutely. So far under Postecoglou, he invested, or the club invested, in younger players. Archie Gray, and players like that who are sort of coming through, and Bergvall, who looks a terrific prospect, and building for the future. So Postecoglou did, I think, mention that in his statement, that he was sort of building for the future. So the Ten Hag comparison is a little bit harsh. And all the noises coming out of Manchester United were issues with one or two players with the manager, which was obviously sort of seen. I mean, Ruben Amarim's trying to pick up the pieces of some of those players who wanted out. So yeah, I've got sympathy for him. But if they can get Thomas Frank, who is a fantastic coach, I just think that a lot of this will calm down. And people like me who felt that Postecoglou had actually deserved, because the game has to be about trophies. It has to be about glory. It's not simply about finishing fifth in the Champions League. And remember, he did actually get them into the Champions League as well.
We'll talk more about Thomas Frank in just a moment, one of the leading contenders, as we understand at the moment, to replace Ange Postecoglou. But what about Postecoglou, the man, the character, Mark? Do you think it's fair to say we will miss him in the media the fans will miss him, the wider public will miss him. You think of his quotes, and they link it here on the back page here. Season 3 cancelled. One of his quotes on top of the bus parade. I always win things in my second year. Are you not entertained? And this quote about season 3. I mean, he's undoubtedly a character.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the season 3 quote was a great line. You can't knock him for that. But I think at times Ange did sound like a bit like a broken record when he was going on about, the injuries and the performances and the criticism in the media, and suggesting that people were having a go at him because of his accent, because of his background, and because of anything but his results. So yes, but we're talking about him, and the fact that he was spiky and he was a combative interview at times. I think that's good. That he stood up for himself and he stood up for his methods, and at times, justifiably they were criticised by people like ourselves and former players, but he defended himself, and he did say he'll win a trophy in his second season. Not might, but would, and he did. So fair play to him. But I'd be surprised if we see him in the Premier League again. I'm not sure his way of playing the game will appeal to too many owners who are a bit more pragmatic and want their teams to be, certain of finishing quite high up the league. I think he may end up in Europe again, but he's left a mark. He's won a trophy, so you can't knock that. He's delivered on what he was appointed to do.
Mark mentioned about the potential, maybe not potential, of Ange Postecoglou managing in the Premier League again. Henry, what do you make of that? Surely there must be clubs out there in the Premier League thinking they'd love to have Ange Postecoglou, bearing in mind he's just won that big trophy.
I'm not so sure. I mean, I just think that, we can look at it from our perspective and say it's all about the glory, and think with the heart, and maybe a bit romanticize it, and maybe think also as fans and think, actually, you want that trophy, you want that day out, you want that trip, you want that shared memory with friends and family. But I think if you're, a cold-eyed chief executive with an accountancy background, and maybe you've got American owners, foreign owners who would just be looking at the Champions League, because the Champions League is the biggest party. That's what everyone wants to be in. Okay, he's got them in there through this weird route of the Europa League. But I just think the owners will say, no, it's all about where you finish in the table.
And of course, we should stress Tottenham's worst ever Premier League season, finishing one place above the relegation zone. So it now turns to who will replace Postecoglou at Tottenham. A lot of talk about Thomas Frank, Mark. Why do you think he's being so heavily linked? Why do you think he could be potentially the right man for Tottenham?
Well, he's got a Premier League track record. He's done really well at Brentford over the years. He knows how to work with a squad of players that haven't necessarily been brought in by him, but by the club structure. He's good at making young players better. I mean, we've seen what he's done with Ivan Toney, with Brian Mbeumo, with Visser. He makes good players into very good players. And from Tottenham's perspective, he'll appeal because he makes players more valuable. And we know that Tottenham are a big club, but they do like to, balance the books, and he will make players better, and potentially better to the point where they sell on to even bigger clubs. So he's got that track record, and I think that's what will appeal to Tottenham. Obviously, he's got Brentford punching above their weight. He's a great coach, Thomas Frank, but it's a big step up to Tottenham. It's a Big Six club with a big history, and you have to wonder whether Thomas Frank can make that step. But until he tries it, we don't know. But, there's other names of the frame, Marco Silva, Andoni Iraola. I wouldn't be surprised if Mauricio Pochettino gets a mention at some point, because, it's not going too great for him in the US right now, but I think that would be quite a leap from Tottenham to go back to Poch. But, I'm sure that it would appeal to both sides. But I think Thomas Frank, as it stands, is the favourite, but he will cost a decent-sized compensation fee from Brentford, so it won't be easy. We know that Tottenham don't like to do things that cost a lot of money, so it might take a while to negotiate, but I think Thomas Frank has earned the right for a big club, at a big job at a big club.
Mark mentioned the compensation, which is something the Mirror touch on in their headline. They can be ready to grab Frank Tottenham if they pay £10 million, is what the Mirror have to say. Henry, just want to get your take on Thomas Frank. Then he's had these really good spell at Brentford, at a stable club over a long period of time. Do you think he'd absolutely be ready to jump at the chance at Tottenham? Different challenge, and of course, very different expectations at Tottenham.
Well, first, what he did at Brentford, 132 wins in 317 games. I mean, he got them promoted and he consolidated them, as well as fantastic recruitment has absolutely helped him. But I do think he's got the personality to step up to such a sort of media scrutinised club as Tottenham Hotspur. Anyone who's spent any time with him and seen how he is, A, around players, B, around the media, C, around the stuff. He's a very thoughtful, very engaging character, very open. And I think Tottenham fans would absolutely take to him But I think Brentford, as you say, will fight to hold on to him. I mean, £10 million. Actually, when you're getting an individual of that quality, I think he's a natural successor to Ange Postecoglou. But there will be pressure on him, because if he doesn't get a trophy in his second season, you'll get me and Oggy saying, well, you know, the Aussie did it.
Henry, Mark, thanks for now. Much more to come. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll look at more of the sports stories in the morning's papers, including this. Inside the Telegraph, Amarim told major improvement is expected by United. You're watching Back Pages tonight. It's welcome back to ESPN's senior writer Mark Ogden and sports journalist and broadcaster Henry Winter. Let's go to the back of the Sun. Henry, just want to come to you on this one. Of course, they're focusing on the Ange Postecoglou story, but we want to talk to you about Manchester United and Victor Gyökeres. It's victory for United is their headline. So according to the Sun, Henry, it looks like Gyökeres might be on his way to Old Trafford.
Yeah, I mean, he was heavily linked with Arsenal, but Seshko looks an opportunity for them, for Arsenal. I mean, Gyökeres, obviously, he knows Ruben Amarim very well. He would absolutely fit into that system which he played under Amarim at Sporting. He can play that lone striker role, which Rasmus Højlund is obviously struggled in. He's being linked with move to Italian clubs. So yeah, it makes a lot. But I thought Manchester United were saying that they didn't have much money. And, you know, they bought Cunha, they're being linked with Brian and Bremo. They're holding on to Bruno Fernandes, which is great news. They're going to have to start offloading a few players soon as well if they are going to sign these. But if you can get a player like Gyökeres in, fantastic. He's a terrific striker.
So, Mark, if Gyökeres does go to Manchester United and they've signed Cunha already and Bumo could be on the way from Brentford. I mean, it all suddenly looks a lot rosier for United, but as Henry alluded to there, there'll have to be some outgoings as well, you would suspect.
Yeah, well, I mean, those three players you mentioned, that amounts to just short of £200 million because Gyökeres has got a £70 million release clause. So, Man United were pleading poverty just a couple of weeks ago, and like Henry says, they've suddenly found a bit of cash behind the sofa. But I know they've had some financial results that have looked a little bit better than they expected today, and I think that will help them. And we were told that they could afford to do Cunha and Delap, but obviously Delap went to Chelsea, but Delap was only £30 million. So it's a big leap to Gyökeres and to Mbeumo, but they need those players. But they've got a lot of players to move on. Marcus Rashford, Anthony, Jadon Sancho, maybe a couple of others, Alejandro Garnacho perhaps, maybe even Kobbie Mainoo. So they're going to have to get people out the door. And, Gyökeres was a big success under Ruben Amarim at Sporting. We know that he had time in England at Brighton, at Coventry. Has he got it? What it takes in the Premier League? I know that there was a little bit of doubt at United at one point that he could make the step up in the Premier League, having been in the Portuguese league. The name that was mentioned to me was Darwin Núñez, who has struggled at Liverpool after being at Benfica. He scored goals, Núñez, but he's not scored at anything like the level that they expected him to. So that is a big question, I guess. United are trying to sign players that have got Premier League pedigree, but obviously Gyökeres has had a great season at Sporting. He's done it back to back. But like Henry says, the money is suddenly appearing out of nowhere.
Henry, let's stay talking with Manchester United and Ruben Amarim. A headline here in the Telegraph. Amarim told major improvement is expected by United, even if they have a strong summer transfer window. Given how this season has gone for Amarim, he's really going to have to hit the ground running next season, isn't he, Henry?
Well, he is, but remember, he arrived halfway through the season, and any coach manager will tell you that they need a pre-season. He also needs a proper transfer window. We've discussed some of the players he would like to sign. I mean, he's also having to deal with a squad which is basically created by about 4 or 5 different managers, almost different recruiting teams. And that absolutely needs addressing, players going out. But the main issue is his tactical template of 3-4-2-1 is simply not suited to that squad, which is more 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3. So the club, they knew that. They knew how he was going to play. So when Ineos brought him in, they now have to absolutely accept that they've got to back their man. They've got to do it long term. He has to win the arguments with individual players. He has to win the argument with the recruitment department and get the players that suit his system. Otherwise, it's pointless having him. He's a terrific young coach. He can grow with Manchester United, but they've got to back him properly.
Let's stay with the Telegraph and talk about England and some comments from the boss Thomas Tuchel about Jack Grealish. Of course, he's played precious little league football recently for Manchester City, and he needs to move to a club with a spot in Europe, according to Tukul. Quite honest comments here, Mark. What do you make of them?
Yeah, well, if Jack Grealish is going to go to the World Cup, he needs to be playing. And obviously he missed out on the Euros last summer because he'd fallen out of favour at Man City. And a year on, his situation hasn't really improved, has it? So Jack Grealish needs to play. And Thomas Tuchel obviously wants him to play, but at a higher level. He doesn't want him to play, down the Premier League and just, playing for a club with domestic issues. He wants to see Grealish play at the top level. But I think the issue there is that Jack Grealish obviously cost a huge fee, £100 million when he signed for Man City, and they'll want to get some of that back. But it'll be his wages. There's so many clubs in the game now that can't afford to pay the wages or the fee. So Jack Grealish needs a move, but I think he's 29 now, so it's going to be very difficult for Grealish to get a move at anything close to what he's expected to earn at Man City. And City will have to maybe be realistic as well. So I hope he does move. I think Jack Grealish needs to play. He's a great player, but his situation financially might be the problem.
Let's talk more about England, Henry, and Ivan Toney. Headline here in the Telegraph as well, that Toney faces audition as stand-in for Kane. So do you see it right now as him being a key contender as backup for Kane, even as some would see it, despite him playing in the Saudi Pro League?
Yeah, I thought when he went to the Saudi Pro League, that would be the last we'd see of Ivan Toney, and he would be stuck on 6 caps. But I think he'll certainly get his 7th either tomorrow against Andorra, coming on as an understudy for Harry Kane, or against Senegal at the City Ground on Tuesday. I think there must be a temptation to consider taking him to the World Cup simply for one touch, because we know he can take a penalty, and that could be absolutely crucial for England, particularly in a 26-man squad. Tuchel has got a little bit of license to have almost a sort of wild card on the bench. I mean, I spoke to him at England's training ground a couple of days ago. It was up in the hills in Girona. And I said, you know, it's an issue for strikers nowadays is that most teams play with only one up. And you know, he said, "Yeah, I wish they were playing with sort of two up effectively." But that's what he's got to focus on. We can't feel too sorry for Ivan Toney when he's got a fantastic player like Harry Kane in front of him. We also could have a little bit of sympathy for Dominic Solanke, who's not in the squad, and also for Ollie Watkins, who would have loved a chance, but he's had to go home today because of a slight precaution over a minor injury. So no, but I think you're right. I think Ivan Toney is increasingly in pole position. But I think what we'll see in under-21s. In September, as the under-21s will step up. Adam Wharton, obviously, is recovering from concussion at the moment in midfield. But Liam Delap, as long as he's not too exhausted after his trip around America and this Club World Cup lark.
Just 20 seconds, if it's OK to you, Mark. Ivan Toney, have you been impressed with the way he's conducted himself out in Saudi Arabia and the goals he scored?
Yeah, I mean, I think myself and Henry would be lying if we said we've seen a lot of his games in Saudi Arabia and how he's performed. But obviously, he's on Thomas Tuchel's radar and he said the right things this week. So he deserves a chance. He's a good player, Ivan Toney, but he's going to have to do it next season as well to make sure he gets to the World Cup.
Mark, Henry, thanks very much indeed for your insight. Much appreciated. And if you missed any of the show, a chance to see back pages tonight at hour. You can also catch up where you get your podcasts from as well. Just search for Back Pages. On the way, much more on Ange Postecoglou winning a trophy, but he's on his way out after 2 years at Spurs.